Hey guys, how are you all doing? This is the MMA breakdown with my picks for UFC 164, Henderson versus Pettis 2. I've been getting my picks in kind of late. I know for the last event, Condit versus Campman 2, I had my picks up like a day before the fight, but I'm not going to miss them. I will have them up, and I'll try to get them up earlier from now on. But for those of you who watch, I really appreciate it. But yeah, Henderson versus Pettis 2, the main card, I think is really exciting. A lot of great fights, and let's just run through the card and I'll give you my picks. So on the Facebook prelim card, first up, Jared the Messenger Hammond versus Magnus Siedenblad. Jared Hammond, how many fights has he lost in a row now? I think he's on a 2-fight losing streak. I think his last loss was against Michael Kuiper. Yeah, and then before that, lost to Costa Philippou. Knocked out in both fights, but he's shown he can take a lot of damage. But before that, he had a good win over CB Dalloway, a fight where he was losing, nearly got choked out and came back, pushed through, showed great heart and cardio, was able to get the finish. I'm going to go with Hammond on this. I think Magnus Siedenblad is just the bottom of the rung in the UFC. I believe this is his third fight. Got choked out by Simeon Thorson and also by Francis Carmont. I think the Carmont fight was slightly competitive. He got on top at one point, if I remember correctly, but I think Hammond's good enough to beat him, probably finish him. I'll pick Hammond by TKO, second or third round. Next up, Ryan Couture versus Ally Quinta. Ryan Couture coming off the loss to Ross Pearson, getting knocked out. And Ally Quinta, we haven't seen him since the tough 15 finale live season where he lost to Michael Chiesa, and he was doing pretty well in that fight, but got taken down and choked out. Ally Quinta, though, I think he's really talented. He got some finishes on the show in the house. Good striking, pretty crafty jiu-jitsu game. I don't see Couture winning this. Not athletic enough. Striking isn't great. Quinta by knockout. First or second round. Next up, Soa Paole versus Nikita Krylov. Don't know anything about these two fighters. I think Paole was supposed to fight the guy who beat Roy Nelson. Can't think of his name. Sorry, the Croatian guy. Stipe Miocic. He was supposed to fight him at UFC 161. So I'll just say Paole. I'm not going to try to give any analysis on these fighters because I don't know. So I'll just say Paole. Wild guess. And then the prelim card, which is on Fox Sports 1. Not 2 anymore. I guess the prelims are going to be on Fox Sports 1, but at bantamweight, Chico Camus versus Kyung Ho Kang. Chico Camus has been up and down. Won his first fight against Dustin Paige in the UFC. He found himself defending the triangle choke a lot. Did a good job to not get finished by it, but basically won on control. Top control in that fight, and then got submitted by Dustin Kimura in his last fight. So up and down. Still haven't seen too much of his game in those two fights. And Kyung Ho Kang, I believe he beat Cristiano Marcelo in his last fight. Yeah, I can't remember that fight too well with Marcelo and King. think it was kind of a brawl, but I don't know. I'll go with Camus by decision, I think. But yeah, I don't know. It's a toss-up, but I'll go with Camus. Next up, Pascal Kraus versus Hyun Gyu Lim. And Pascal Kraus coming off a win over Mike Stumpf, nobody in the UFC, and before that he lost to John Hathaway. This is his fourth fight in the UFC. I liked what I saw against Mike Stumpf. Pretty good kickboxing, pretty active striking, good knees, nothing spectacular. And Hyun Gyu Lim is coming off of a devastating knockout win against Marcelo Guimaraes. That was his debut in the UFC. It's a pretty slow fight up until he got the knockout. I believe it was a flying knee knockout or just a standing knee to the chin, but obviously showed his finishing power in that fight. But I'll go with Kraus on this one. I think he's got good enough kickboxing to keep away from the power of Lim. I think Kraus wins by decision. Next up at flyweight, Louis Goodnight Gaudinot versus Tim Elliott. This is Gaudinot's only his third fight in the UFC. He's a tough veteran from Tough 14, the bantamweight and featherweight season, and he's a really exciting fighter. You saw that in the house, and then he lost to Johnny Bedford at the finale. But that was at bantamweight, where he was really small, dropped down to flyweight, and I was really impressed with his win over John Lineker. And we all know how good John Lineker's doing now. And Gaudinot, in that fight, it was a wild brawl, back and forth. Looked like he got hurt at one point and was able to pull out a guillotine choke out of nowhere, able to finish Lineker. So he's real tough, able to come back from behind. It's kind of a wild brawler. And Tim Elliott is a real crafty guy. I actually thought he won the fight against John Dodson. The decision didn't go his way. And then won his last fight against Jared Papazian, where he basically outskilled him. Never really came close to finishing, as I remember. Wasn't too impressive. But I think Tim Elliott throws a lot of kind of real wild techniques. In that fight with Dodson, he was doing spinning kicks and that kind of stuff. I think his technique on the feet is going to be more polished than Gaudinot, but I think Gaudinot, making it a brawl, he'll be able to pull something out, either catch Elliott or a submission. But I'm going to go with Gaudinot. Gaudinot by, I'm going to say Gaudinot by decision. I think he grinds it out, stays tough, and brawls his way to a win. And next up, last fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelim card, Jamie Varner versus Gleison Tibau. A really good fight. I like this matchup a lot. Jamie Varner, coming back to the UFC, had an incredible knockout win over Edson Barboza, and was doing really well against Lozon. A really competitive, exciting fight, and lost by triangle choke, and then rebounded with a solid decision win over Melvin Gillard. And Gleison Tibau, the guy can't hold a win streak. His last 4 fights have been win-loss, win-loss. After he was on a 3-5 win streak, culminating with a win over Rafael Dos Anjos, lost the decision to Khabib Nurmagomedov, then won against Francisco Trinaldo. He almost got choked out in that fight, though. Lost to Evan Dunham, and then beat John Cholish, submitted him in his last fight. T-Bow, I think he's a really skilled fighter, but I think he keeps himself out of the elite of the division. He doesn't start fast enough. He's one of those guys who's a real slow starter, and if the fight's close, he usually fights like he thinks he's winning. He won't go for the finish, won't go for the kill if the fight's starting to drag on. He seems to be a guy who really looks for that one moment to capitalize. If he sees a guy's hurt, he'll really go after him, and if he doesn't get the finish, kind of blows his wad. Not a very active striker, doesn't throw high volume. And Jamie Varner, I think, is the exact opposite. Saw that in his last 2 fights, both against Lozon and Gallard. Throws a high volume, keeps a high pace. His cardio waned a bit in the Lozon fight, I think, but I'm going to pick Varner by decision. I think his boxing is good enough. He's going to be in and out. I think he's got the speed advantage on T-Bow. I think he'll box him up for 3 rounds and win the decision. And the main card, Eric Koch versus Dustin Poirier. Another great matchup. Makes a lot of sense. 2 featherweights who've been really up and down. They both have fallen in the big fight. Koch losing his last one, getting brutally finished by Ricardo Lamas. And Dustin Poirier, who lost his last fight to Cub Swanson. I believe that was his last fight. Yeah, pretty sure. Yes. But I'm taking Poirier. I think he's more skilled. He doesn't have the knockout power that Koch has. I'll give Koch that. We've seen Koch knock out Francisco Rivera with a head kick, and also knocked out Rafael Assunção with he threw a hook as he was moving backwards. That was pretty impressive. I think Koch's got the knockout power, but Poirier, again, more active striker, high volume, puts together good combinations. On the ground, Poirier's shown he's really good with the Darce choke. Had that mounted triangle armbar against Max Holloway. I think Poirier is just better on the ground, and on the feet, Koch could catch him, but I think Poirier is gonna outlast him on the feet. Basically win on volume. So I'm gonna take Poirier by decision. Next up, Ben Rothwell, Brandon Vera. The one fight that this is kind of the stain on the main card. Not too big on this fight, but anyway, Ben Rothwell, another guy, up and down. Got submitted in his last fight by Gabriel Gonzaga, but he's managed to get a few good wins. He knocked out Brendan Schaub. Well, maybe that was his only good win. But he's been up and down since he's come to the UFC. Loss, win, loss, win, loss. Brandon Vera had a really inspirational performance against Shogun in his last fight. Really took it to him. I think he had Shogun in trouble. But that was a year ago, and that's a long layoff. And he's moving back to heavyweight. I don't know how he's going to be at heavyweight. But with that being said, I'll still take Vera. He's just shown me more than Rothwell has. Rothwell against in the fight against Schaub, it's kind of a wild exchange. Schaub came in wild. Rothwell, hasn't shown too much of a complete game. I think the best we've seen of his all-around game was against Gilbert Yvel, and that's not a good measure for where he's at. So I think Brandon Vera, I think he might be able to get the finish, but more likely I think decision, Brandon Vera. And next up at featherweight, Chad Money Mendez versus Clay the Carpenter Guida. I have to go with Mendez all the way. I think he's going to steamroll Guida. Guida's just not the same guy he used to be. I did think he won his last fight against Hioki. A lot of people thought Hioki won that fight. I thought Guida won on control, on takedowns. But I think this guy's peaked with his win over Anthony Pettis 2 years ago. And even the fight against Henderson, he lost that fight, but it was competitive in some spots. He got Henderson in a few chokes. But the fight against Maynard, which I also thought he won, I know that's really unpopular to say, but his style is just, he's lost all that savagery that used to make him such an exciting and an elite fighter. I have to go with Mendez. He's been steamrolling people. His last, 3 fights now, knocking guys out in the first round. It's been incredible. Knocked out Darren Elkins in his last fight, first round. Yatsen Meza. Who was the other guy? Cody McKenzie. He's on a 3-fight win streak, knocking guys out quick in the first round. I think he's going to do the same to Guida. Guida's whole game has just become wrestling, holds people down. He doesn't even do any ground and pound anymore when he gets on top. So I don't see this fight going any differently than any of Mendez's previous fights. So Mendez by first round KO. And Guida's hands are not... I don't think they're anywhere near the level of Mendez, especially now that he has Dwayne Ludwig training him. And then the co-main event, heavyweight bout, Frank Mir versus Josh, the War Master Barnett. Barnett making his return to the UFC. His last fight, Josh Barnett beat Nandor Guillermo. No name. Nonetheless, he got the submission in I believe it was the first round. And before that, had a hard-fought decision loss against Daniel Cormier. Frank Mir, also I think on the tail end of his career, dropped a decision to Daniel Cormier where he was basically just held up against the fence the whole fight, and that's why he lost. Before that, lost the fight to Junior Dos Santos, getting knocked out. But I don't know, it's real interesting. I think Barnett, he's definitely been more impressive than Frank Mir has been of late. Even against Antonio Nogueira, Big Nog, Frank Mir nearly got knocked out in that fight. And going back 2 years to the Roy Nelson fight when Mir beat Nelson, that was really kind of sloppy fight. He gassed real quick. Striking didn't look all too good. And Mir, I think, is just a horrible wrestler, one of the worst at heavyweight. He can't get guys down to where he can use his jiu-jitsu, which is obviously elite, really good. And Frank Mir's striking has been an enigma for me. Way back, like 4 years ago almost, when he blasted Czech Congo, put him down, and then knocked him out. I thought this guy's got some power. Also, before that, knocked out Big Nog, but I think Big Nog, obviously it was sick. But in the Carwin fight and the Dos Santos fight, even the Roy Nelson fight, his striking does not look too good. Didn't look like it did against Big Nog, and I think that was kind of a one-time thing for Mir. We don't see that in his game anymore. With that being said, if Frank Mir really lets his hands go, I think he will have the speed advantage on Barnett, and I think he also has the power advantage if he really throws those hands, but he hasn't done that for such a long time. Really, I think the last time we saw Frank Mir striking at an elite level was against Congo, and that was 4 years ago. Barnett, on the other hand, more of an active striker than Frank Mir's been of late. I don't think he puts too much power in his shots. Saw that against Cormier, wasn't really able to hurt him with striking. I think his game is much more submission based now. Takes guys down. Submitted Brett Rogers, a Russian guy whose name I can't think of right now, in his last fight. I do think he'll be able to take Frank Mir down. Although I think once he gets to the ground, I think Frank Mir has more from his guard than Barnett has from top. Barnett's really good, obviously, but the guys he's been submitting are far from great submission fighters. I think Mir might be able to pull off an armbar or a reversal to get on top if Barnett gets him down, which I think Barnett definitely has the better wrestling than Mir. So it's a tough one for me. I think Mir can pull out a submission, but I'm going to go with Barnett just because Mir, I think, has really been uninspirational in his last few fights. Barnett either by decision or by submission, although I have a hard time seeing him submitting Mir from top. Mir's a really big guy. I think Barnett will have a tough time locking up his signature head and arm choke, but I'm going to go with Barnett. And then the title fight, Ben Henderson versus Anthony Pettis. Rematch, 3 years in the making. The first fight was really fun, exciting. I haven't watched it recently, but I remember Pettis having back control in that fight a lot while Henderson was on his feet. The first round, Henderson came out, took Pettis down, really roughed him up a bit, but Pettis got stronger as that fight went on. I think Henderson had his back at one point and had the rear naked choke fully locked in or nearly fully locked in. The striking, I can't remember too much of the striking thing. I don't think either guy really got a definitive advantage in the striking department in that fight. Initially, thinking about this fight, I thought Pettis was just going to steamroll him. Both these guys have clearly grown so much since that last fight 3 years ago, but Pettis just blowing through guys like Lozon. His complete effortless destruction of Donald Cerrone just ran through him like a hot knife through butter, doing those knees off the cage and that body kick, putting him down. I think Anthony Pettis' striking is elite. But as I think more about this fight, Henderson, he's had so much octagon experience by now. Pettis, he's been out a lot, injured. And Henderson, I think he's a lot smarter now. I think he's going to be able to put together a game plan to make sure he doesn't get caught off guard in the striking game. Although, that's hard to do because Pettis is so innovative and so unorthodox. But I think Ben's really going to use his wrestling, and we've seen Anthony struggle there. Lost the fight to Guida. Jeremy Stevens was able to make that fight a grappling match against Pettis. And Henderson also has, I think he's grown so much since that fight. His destruction of Miller, beating Guida, coming over from WEC, just running through guys, although he hasn't gotten the finish, but just a complete manhandling of Nate Diaz. Henderson's really good. If he stays striking with Pettis, I don't think he can get it done. But I do think he can put together a smart enough game plan to out-wrestle him and stay champion. Pettis, though, such an elite striker. I wouldn't be surprised if Pettis pulls out a finish even or wins a decision, outpointing Henderson on the feet. But I think Henderson will get it done. It's a smart game plan in wrestling. So those are my picks for UFC 164. Thanks for watching, guys. Please like the video, comment, subscribe, and check out my video, my recap for Condit versus Campman 2. Thanks, guys. See ya.